The dust kicked up in golden clouds as Faith Kerrigan watched the last wagon pull away from Dillon, Montana, taking the Henderson family toward promises of railroad work in Butte. She stood in front of the one-room schoolhouse, her hands clenched tight around the broom handle, feeling the weight of emptiness settle over the town like the October wind that swept down from the mountains. It was 1884, and Dillon had been dying for 3 years now, ever since the silver mine went bust and took everyone's dreams with it. The population had dwindled from nearly 500 souls to barely 50, and most of those who remained were simply too poor or too stubborn to leave. Faith had come to Dillon 2 years ago, fresh from finishing her teaching certificate in Boston, full of idealism and determination to make a difference on the frontier. She had been 21 then, and the town had still held some vitality, enough children to fill the schoolhouse with laughter and learning. Now she was 23, and only 7 students remained, ranging from 6-year-old Emma Miller to 14-year-old Jacob Patterson. Their parents looked at her with pity and confusion, wondering why a young, educated woman from the East would stay in a place with no future. She swept the porch methodically, watching the Henderson wagon disappear into the distance. That made 3 students gone in as many weeks. Soon there would be no school at all, no reason for her position, no salary from the territorial government. Her boarding house room was paid through the end of the month, and she had maybe $40 saved. Enough to buy passage back east, back to Boston, where her sister kept writing letters begging her to return, promising introductions to suitable young lawyers and merchants. But Faith could not bring herself to leave. Something about this town had gotten into her blood, something about the wide Montana sky and the honest people who worked so hard just to survive. She had made promises to her students, had told them education mattered, that knowledge was the one thing no hardship could take away. How could she abandon them now when they needed her most? You planning to sweep that porch down to bare wood? The voice startled her, deep and tinged with amusement. She looked up to find a cowboy leaning against the fence post, his hat tipped back to reveal dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold both weariness and warmth. She recognized him vaguely as one of the men who worked at the Farley Ranch outside town, though she had never spoken to him directly. "Just keeping busy," she replied, stopping her sweeping. "Idle hands and all that." He pushed off from the fence and walked closer, moving with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with strong hands roughened by rope and leather. "Zane Farrington," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I work cattle for the Farleys. Been meaning to introduce myself proper. Faith Kerrigan, though I suppose you knew that already." "Yes, madam. Hard not to know the teacher in a town this size." He glanced at the departing wagon, now just a speck on the horizon. "Folks keep leaving. They have to follow the work. I understand that." Zane studied her for a long moment, and she felt oddly self-conscious under his gaze. She was not a vain woman, but she knew she was reasonably pretty. With auburn hair she kept pinned up sensibly and green eyes that her mother had always called her best feature. Out here on the frontier, unmarried women were rare enough that she had received several offers of courtship, all of which she had politely declined. Her purpose was teaching, not matrimony. "Why do you stay?" he asked finally. "No offense, Miss Kerrigan, but you do not strike me as someone who belongs in a dying town." The question sparked something defensive in her chest. "Perhaps I stay because everyone expects me to leave. Perhaps I stay because 7 children still need an education, and I gave my word I would provide it." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "That is a fine answer. Did you need something, Mr. Farrington? I have lesson plans to prepare." "Actually, I came to talk to you about my nephew, Tommy. He is 8 years old, bright as a new penny, but he has never had proper schooling. His mother, my sister, passed last spring from pneumonia. My brother-in-law could not manage on his own, so he left Tommy with me and headed for California. I have been teaching the boy what I can, but I am no scholar. Faith felt her irritation melt away. Bring him to school on Monday. We start at 8 o'clock. The thing is, Miss Kerrigan, I cannot pay much. The Farleys pay fair wages, but I have been sending most of my money to support my mother back in Kansas. I could maybe manage $1 a month. The territorial government pays my salary, Mr. Farrington. I do not charge tuition. Just bring Tommy on Monday with whatever books you have, and we will make do. Relief washed over his features. Thank you, truly. Tommy is a good boy. He deserves a chance. Every child deserves a chance. That is why I stay. Zane nodded slowly, that thoughtful expression returning to his eyes. This town needs you to stay, he said quietly. Maybe you do not hear that enough, but it is true. You matter here, Miss Kerrigan, more than you probably realize. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard, and she felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. Before she could formulate a response, he touched his hat brim again and turned to leave, his boots making soft sounds on the dusty street. Faith watched him go, surprised by the flutter of something unfamiliar in her stomach. She had been too busy with teaching and surviving to think much about romance, had convinced herself that such things were for other women, women with different priorities. But something about Zane Farrington's steady presence and genuine concern had stirred something she thought she had buried. She shook her head firmly and went inside to prepare tomorrow's lessons. There was no time for foolish daydreams. Monday morning brought Tommy Farrington to her classroom, a skinny boy with his uncle's dark eyes and an eager expression that made Faith's heart squeeze. Zane had walked him to school, carrying a worn primer and a slate that had seen better days. "You be good for Miss Kerrigan," Zane told his nephew, ruffling the boy's hair. "Mind your manners and work hard." "Yes, sir," Tommy said solemnly. Faith watched the exchange with interest, noting the genuine affection between uncle and nephew. When Zane caught her eye, she felt that flutter again and quickly looked away, focusing on welcoming Tommy and introducing him to the other students. The day passed in the familiar rhythm of lessons and recitations. Faith taught reading and arithmetic, history and geography, moving between students of different ages and abilities with practiced ease. She had learned to make do with limited supplies, using every scrap of paper, every broken piece of chalk, stretching resources as far as they would go. When school let out at 3 o'clock, she was surprised to find Zane waiting outside, leaning against that same fence post. "How did he do?" he asked as Tommy ran up to him, chattering excitedly about learning long division. "Wonderfully. He has a quick mind. With regular instruction, he will catch up to his age level in no time. Can I come back tomorrow, Uncle Zane?" "Miss Kerrigan says we are going to read about the Romans tomorrow, and she has pictures in a book and everything. Of course you can come back. That is the whole point." Zane smiled at his nephew, then looked at Faith. "Thank you again, Miss Kerrigan. It means the world to see him so excited about learning." Over the following weeks, Zane became a regular presence at the school, walking Tommy there each morning before heading out to the ranch, picking him up each afternoon. He often lingered to talk with Faith, conversations that started with questions about Tommy's progress and gradually expanded into discussions of books and ideas, life on the frontier, dreams for the future. Faith found herself looking forward to these conversations more than she cared to admit. Zane was intelligent despite his lack of formal education, curious about the world beyond Montana, thoughtful in his observations. He listened when she talked about her students, about her frustrations with limited resources, about her determination to give these children hope even as their town crumbled around them. "You could have left a dozen times by now," he said one crisp November afternoon as they watched the children play in the schoolyard. "Why do you really stay?" Faith considered the question carefully. "I suppose because leaving feels like admitting defeat. My whole life, people told me I was too idealistic, that I needed to be practical. Coming out here, teaching on the frontier, it was my way of proving I could make a difference. If I leave now, what does that say? That they were right. That idealism cannot survive contact with reality. Or maybe it says you gave everything you had and it still was not enough. That is not failure, Miss Kerrigan. That is just life. Please call me Faith. I think we have moved beyond formalities." He smiled at that, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Only if you call me Zane." "All right, Zane, but I am not ready to admit defeat yet. As long as one child needs teaching, I will stay. What if the territorial government stops paying your salary? What if there are not enough students to justify keeping the school open? Then I will figure something out. I always do." He shook his head, but there was admiration in his expression. "You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met." "I prefer determined." "Stubborn," he insisted, but his tone was warm, almost affectionate. Faith felt her cheeks flush and busied herself straightening her skirts. This was dangerous territory, these feelings that seemed to grow stronger every time she saw him. She had not come to Montana to find a husband. She had come to teach, to make a difference, to prove herself. But when Zane looked at her like that, when his voice softened and his eyes held that particular warmth, she found it increasingly difficult to remember why love and purpose had to be mutually exclusive. Winter came early to Dillon that year, sweeping down from the mountains with fierce winds and heavy snow. The schoolhouse was drafty, and Faith spent her meager savings on firewood to keep the potbelly stove burning. Some mornings it was so cold that ink froze in the wells, and she had to keep the bottles close to the stove until they thawed. Despite the hardships, her students kept coming. Emma and her brother, the Patterson boys, little Sarah Chen, whose parents ran the general store, and Tommy, always eager and bright-eyed, soaking up knowledge like parched earth soaking up rain. Zane continued his daily routine of dropping off and picking up Tommy, but now he often brought extra firewood, stacking it silently outside the schoolhouse without asking for thanks. Once he brought a box of slate pencils he had somehow acquired, and another time a set of nearly new primers he claimed he had found at the ranch, though Faith suspected he had purchased them with his own money. "You do not have to do this," she told him one frigid December afternoon. "You already pay what you can for Tommy's education." "I am not doing it for Tommy," he said simply. "I am doing it for you." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Faith's heart hammered in her chest. "Zane, I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything. I just want you to know that you are not alone in this. That someone sees what you are doing, how hard you work, how much you sacrifice. This town needs you to stay, Faith. I need you to stay." She looked up at him, and the intensity in his eyes took her breath away. This was no longer about Tommy or teaching or the dying town. This was something deeper, something real and frightening and wonderful all at once. "Why?" she whispered. "Because somewhere between watching you refuse to give up on this town and listening to you talk about ancient Rome with the same passion you use for teaching arithmetic, I fell in love with you. Because you are the strongest, most determined person I have ever met. Because when I think about the future, I cannot imagine it without you in it." Faith felt tears sting her eyes. "I am not staying for you. I cannot be that woman, the one who gives up her purpose for a man. I am not asking you to give up anything. I am asking you to let me stand beside you, to support what you are trying to do here. I am asking you to consider that maybe love and purpose can exist together, that you do not have to choose between them. She wanted to protest, to explain all the reasons why this was complicated, why she had to keep her focus on teaching. But the words would not come, because deep down she knew he was right. She had been so determined to prove she did not need anyone that she had blinded herself to the possibility of partnership, of sharing her burdens with someone who understood and respected her mission. I care for you too, she admitted finally. More than I expected to, but I am frightened, Zane. What if caring for you makes me weak? What if I start making decisions based on emotion instead of principle? He reached out and gently took her hand. Even through their gloves, she could feel the warmth of his touch. Caring for someone does not make you weak. It makes you human. And I have never met anyone with stronger principles than you. I trust you to stay true to yourself, Faith. The question is whether you trust yourself. She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. In his eyes she saw patience and understanding, a willingness to wait for her to work through her fears. It was that patience, that respect for her autonomy that finally tipped the scales. I do care for you, she said again, more firmly this time. And I would like to see where this might lead, if you are willing to be patient with me. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. I will be as patient as you need me to be. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. Around them, the December wind howled, but Faith felt warmer than she had in months. Christmas came and went quietly in Dillon. The few remaining families gathered at the church for a simple service, and Faith organized a small celebration at the school, with songs and recitations and cookies that the mothers had baked. Tommy performed a speech about George Washington that Zane had helped him memorize, and the pride on Zane's face as he watched his nephew made Faith's heart swell. After the celebration, as the families drifted home through the snow, Zane lingered behind. "Walk with me," he asked. "Where to?" "Just around town. I want to show you something." Curious, Faith bundled up in her worn coat and followed him out into the cold. The snow crunched under their boots as they walked down the nearly empty Main Street, past the shuttered shops and boarded-up buildings that spoke of Dillon's slow decline. But Zane did not lead her past the decay. Instead, he pointed out the things that remained, the signs of life and determination. The general store, still open and serving the community. The church where Reverend Michael still held services every Sunday despite his congregation dwindling to a dozen. The blacksmith shop where old Hank Morrison still shoed horses and mended tools. The boarding house where Mrs. Patterson still cooked meals for travelers and boarders alike. "You see it?" Zane asked. "This town is not dead yet. It is hurting, yes. Changed, absolutely. But as long as people like you stay, as long as there are folks willing to fight for it, Dillon has a chance." Faith looked around with new eyes, seeing what he saw. The town was not just dying buildings and empty lots. It was people, relationships, community. It was worth fighting for. "Thank you," she said softly. "I needed to see this, to remember why I am here. You are here because you have a good heart and an iron will, but you do not have to carry this burden alone anymore, Faith. Let me help. Let us figure out together how to keep this school open, how to give these children the future they deserve." She turned to face him fully, this man who had somehow become essential to her happiness. The moonlight reflected off the snow, casting his face in silver and shadow. He was handsome, yes, but more than that, he was good, kind and steady and true. "I love you," she said, the words coming easier than she expected. I fought it for so long because I was afraid, but I love you, Zane Farrington." His eyes widened, and then he was pulling her close, his arms wrapping around her with gentle strength. "I love you too, so much." He kissed her then, soft and sweet despite the cold, and Faith felt something click into place inside her chest, like a puzzle piece she had not known was missing finally finding its home. This was right. He was right. They were right together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and smiling, Faith felt lighter than she had in years. The burden of her mission had not changed, but now she had someone to share it with, someone who understood and supported her calling. "Marry me," Zane said suddenly. "I know it is fast. I know you probably want time to think about it, but I am sure, Faith. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. Marry me and we will face whatever comes together." Faith laughed, the sound bright and joyful in the cold night air. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." They were wed in January, a simple ceremony in the small church with the whole town in attendance. Mrs. Patterson made Faith a dress from her own wedding gown, altered and updated, and Sarah Chen's mother fashioned a bouquet from dried flowers and evergreen branches. Tommy served as ring bearer, solemn and proud in his best clothes, and Emma and the other students sang hymns during the service. Reverend Michaels pronounced them man and wife, and when Zane kissed her, the small congregation erupted in applause and cheers. For one shining moment, Dillon felt alive again, full of hope and possibility. They moved into a small house at the edge of town, a two-room cabin that Zane rented from the Farleys. It was modest but clean, with a good stove and windows that faced the mountains. Faith continued teaching, and Zane continued working cattle, and in the evenings they would sit together planning lessons and talking about the future. But as winter turned to spring, the harsh reality of Dillon's situation became impossible to ignore. The territorial government sent word that they could no longer justify paying a teacher's salary for only 6 students. Faith's position would be eliminated at the end of the school year. "What will we do?" she asked Zane one night as they lay together in bed, her head resting on his chest. "Those children need education. Emma is finally learning to read fluently. Jacob is talking about becoming a lawyer. I cannot just abandon them." "You will not abandon anyone," Zane said firmly. "We will find a way." "How? I cannot teach for free. We need my salary to pay rent, to buy food." "I am not being selfish, I am being practical." Zane was quiet for a long moment, his fingers running absently through her hair. "What if you did not need the government's salary? What if the town paid you directly?" "The town has no money, Zane. That is why everyone is leaving." "Some folks have money. The Farleys, the Chens, the Morrisons. They could contribute. And maybe instead of just teaching children, you could offer evening classes for adults, literacy classes, basic arithmetic. A lot of the ranch hands and miners never learn to read properly. They might pay for lessons." Faith sat up, excitement building in her chest. "That could work. If I had even 10 adult students paying 50 cents a week, plus whatever the families could contribute for the children, it might be enough." "We would make it enough," Zane assured her. "I will talk to the Farleys, see if they would be willing to contribute, and I will spread word about the adult classes." Over the next weeks, they worked tirelessly to implement the plan. Faith drew up a proposal and presented it to the remaining families, explaining her vision for a community-supported school that would serve both children and adults. The response was better than she had dared hope. Every family with children pledged what they could, and 8 adults signed up for evening literacy classes, including 2 of the ranch hands who worked alongside Zane. The Farleys, impressed by Faith's dedication and Zane's endorsement, agreed to pay $5 a month toward the school's operation in exchange for Faith teaching their twin daughters, who had been receiving sporadic tutoring from their mother. With all the pledges combined, Faith would make almost as much as her territorial salary, enough to survive. When the letter arrived from the territorial government officially terminating her position, Faith did not cry. Instead, she wrote back thanking them for their past support and informing them that Dillon's school would continue operating under private arrangement. The town had chosen to invest in its own future. That spring, Dillon seemed to wake from its long sleep. The school became a hub of activity, with children's lessons during the day and adult classes 3 evenings a week. Faith taught reading and writing to hardened cowboys and aging miners who had never learned their letters, watching with satisfaction as they slowly, painstakingly formed words and sentences. One of her adult students was a man named Jack Morrison, the blacksmith's nephew, who had dreams of reading law books and maybe becoming a judge someday. Another was Maria Santos, who worked as a cook at the boarding house and wanted to read the letters her family sent from Mexico. Faith worked with each of them patiently, celebrating their victories and encouraging them through their struggles. Zane often sat in on the evening classes when his work allowed, not as a student but as support, helping Faith manage the different skill levels and offering encouragement. Watching him help Jack sound out a difficult word or congratulate Maria on writing her first full sentence, Faith fell in love with him all over again. In May, the territorial governor made a tour through Montana, and his route happened to bring him through Dillon. Word spread quickly, and the town scrambled to make a good impression. Faith saw an opportunity. "We should invite him to visit the school," she told Zane. "Show him what we have accomplished here, how the community has rallied to support education. Maybe if he sees what is possible, he will consider restoring funding or at least advocating for other small towns trying to do the same." "Worth a try," Zane agreed. "Want me to talk to the mayor?" The mayor, such as he was in a town of barely 50 people, agreed enthusiastically. An invitation was extended, and to everyone's surprise, the governor accepted. On the day of the visit, Faith students performed beautifully. The children recited poetry and demonstrated their arithmetic skills. The adult students read passages from their primers, voices shaking with nerves but growing stronger with each word. Tommy, now confident and articulate, gave a speech about the importance of education that brought tears to several eyes. The governor, a portly man with impressive sideburns, seemed genuinely moved. "This is remarkable," he said to Faith after the presentations. "You have created something special here, Mrs. Farrington, something that deserves recognition. Thank you, sir. But I could not have done it without community support. Dillon may be small, but its people are committed to giving their children a future." The governor nodded thoughtfully. "I cannot promise anything, but I will speak to the territorial legislature about creating a fund for rural schools like this one. Not full salaries, perhaps, but grants to help with supplies and building maintenance. Schools that demonstrate community investment and successful outcomes." It was more than Faith had dared hope for. Even a small grant would make a significant difference, allowing her to buy more books and materials, maybe even hire an assistant teacher if the school continued to grow. After the governor left, the town celebrated with a potluck dinner at the church. There was music and dancing, and Zane whirled Faith around the room until she was breathless and laughing. "Look what you have done," he said as they paused to catch their breath. "Look how you have brought this town together." "We did it together," she corrected. "I could not have managed without your support. Still, the vision was yours. The determination, the refusal to give up, that was all you. He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "I am so proud of you, Faith." She smiled up at him, her heart full. "I am exactly where I am supposed to be. With you, with this town, with these students. This is my home now." Summer brought new challenges and new opportunities. The school was too small for all the students Faith now had, so the community rallied again, spending weekends building an addition onto the schoolhouse. Zane worked alongside the other men, sawing and hammering, and Faith and the other women provided food and water. When the addition was complete, Faith stood in the new space and marveled at what they had accomplished together. The room still smelled of fresh lumber and paint, and sunlight streamed through the new windows. She could fit twice as many students now, which was good because word of her evening classes had spread to neighboring ranches, and more adults were asking to enroll. In August, Faith realized she was pregnant. The knowledge filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She wanted children, had always wanted them, but the timing was complicated. How would she manage teaching while carrying a baby? What about after the baby was born? She told Zane over dinner, watching nervously for his reaction. His face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." He was around the table in an instant, pulling her up and spinning her around. "Faith, this is wonderful. I am glad you think so, because I am slightly terrified." He set her down gently, his hands cupping her face. "Why terrified? This is the best news in the world." "Because I do not know how to do both. Be a mother and keep teaching. What if I have to choose?" "You will not have to choose. We will figure it out, just like we have figured out everything else. Maybe you take a few weeks off after the baby is born and I ask my mother to come help. Maybe the older students help teach the younger ones for a while. Maybe we hire one of your adult students as an assistant teacher. There are options, Faith. We will find the right one." His certainty calmed her fears. He was right. They had overcome every other obstacle together. They would overcome this one too. Faith taught through her pregnancy, only slowing down in the final weeks when climbing the schoolhouse steps left her breathless. The community women rallied around her, bringing food and offering advice, and Emma and Sarah took turns helping with the younger students during lessons. In March of 1886, Faith gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named Matthew. The labor was long and difficult, but when they placed her son in her arms, every moment of pain was forgotten. He had Zane's dark eyes and her auburn hair, and she fell instantly and completely in love. Zane was a devoted father from the first moment, changing diapers and walking the floor during late-night crying sessions without complaint. His mother had indeed come from Kansas to help, a kind woman named Dorothy who immediately took charge of the household, allowing Faith to rest and recover. But after 6 weeks, Faith was restless. She missed teaching, missed her students. When she broached the subject with Zane, he did not seem surprised. "I knew you would want to go back. Are you sure you are ready?" "I am ready, and I have been thinking about your suggestion to hire an assistant. Maria has progressed so much in her studies. She is patient with the younger students and she needs the work. What if I offered her the position? She could handle the basic lessons while I focus on the older students and manage the curriculum." "That is a fine idea." "Will we be able to afford her salary?" Faith did some mental calculations. "If 2 more adults enroll in the evening classes, yes. And I think that is likely, given how many have expressed interest." So Maria became Faith's assistant, and the arrangement worked beautifully. The school continued to thrive, and Faith balanced motherhood and teaching with Maria's help and Zane's unwavering support. On days when Matthew was fussy, Dorothy would bring him to the school during lunch, and Faith would nurse him in the small room she had set up for that purpose. The territorial grant came through that summer, $50 to be used for educational supplies. Faith spent it carefully, buying a new globe, updated textbooks, slates for all the students, and a set of maps that she hung proudly on the schoolhouse walls. By Matthew's first birthday, Dillon had stabilized. No, it had not regained its former population and likely never would, but it had stopped dying. A few families had even moved in, drawn by cheap land and the promise of good schooling for their children. The Farleys had expanded their cattle operation, hiring more hands, and the general store was doing steady business again. Faith stood outside the schoolhouse one crisp September morning, watching her students arrive. There were 15 children now, plus 12 adults enrolled in evening classes. The schoolhouse addition was being used every day. What had started as one woman's stubborn refusal to abandon her post had grown into something much larger, a symbol of community resilience and hope. Zane came up behind her, Matthew balanced on his hip. The boy was walking now, chattering constantly in his own toddler language, fascinated by everything. "What are you thinking about?" Zane asked. "How different things are from 2 years ago, how close I came to leaving. But you stayed." "We stayed," she corrected. "I could not have done any of this alone." He shifted Matthew to his other hip and slipped his free arm around her waist. "You would have found a way. That is who you are. Maybe. But I am glad I did not have to find out. I am glad we did this together." Matthew reached for her and she took him, pressing a kiss to his chubby cheek. He smelled like milk and sunshine and her heart squeezed with love. "You ever regret it?" Zane asked. "Staying here instead of going back east? You could have had an easier life there." Faith considered the question seriously. An easier life, perhaps, but not a better one. Not a more meaningful one. Here I am making a real difference. These children, these adults learning to read and write, they matter. Their futures matter. I am part of something important. "You are the center of something important," Zane corrected. "This town needs you to stay, Faith. I told you that from the beginning, and it is even more true now." She looked up at him, this man who had believed in her when she was ready to give up on herself. "I am not going anywhere. This is my home. You are my home." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, with Matthew giggling between them. Around them, the town of Dillon went about its morning business, alive and thriving in its own small way. The mountains stood eternal in the distance, and the Montana sky stretched endless and blue overhead. Faith had come to the frontier to prove herself, to make a difference, to show that idealism could survive in a harsh world. She had stayed for principle, for stubbornness, for a promise made to children who needed her. But in the end, she stayed for love. Love for her students, for her town, for the life she and Zane had built together. Love for the future they were creating, one lesson at a time, one student at a time, one day at a time. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and lessons. Matthew was joined by a daughter they named Catherine when Faith was 26, and then another son, Daniel, when she was 28. Each time, Faith took a few weeks to recover and then returned to teaching, unable to stay away from the work that gave her such purpose and satisfaction. Maria proved to be an excellent assistant teacher, eventually taking over the children's classes entirely while Faith focused on the adult students and administrative work. Together, they developed a curriculum that was used as a model by other small Montana schools, and Faith was invited to speak at the Territorial Education Conference in Helena, the first woman to be so honored. Zane's career prospered too. His hard work and honest dealing caught the attention of the Farleys, and when old Mr. Farley decided to retire, he offered to sell Zane a parcel of ranch land at a generous price. Zane and Faith saved carefully, and with a loan from the bank in Butte, They purchased 200 acres with good grazing land and a creek running through it. They built a house, nothing fancy but solid and spacious, with a big kitchen where Faith could work on lesson plans while the children played and a wide porch where they could sit in the evenings watching the sunset. Tommy, now 17 and preparing to leave for college in Missoula, helped with the building, as did many of the men Zane had worked alongside for years. The ranch kept Zane busy, but he always made time for his family. He taught Matthew to ride before the boy was 5, and patiently answered Catherine's endless questions about the cattle and horses. He read to them in the evenings, his rough cowboy hands turning pages carefully, his deep voice bringing stories to life. Faith watched him with their children and fell more in love with him every day. He was everything she had not known she needed, partner and supporter and friend. He never asked her to be less than she was, never resented the time she spent teaching, never suggested that her place was solely in the home. Instead, he made it possible for her to be both mother and teacher, both wife and professional, showing her that she did not have to choose between the different parts of herself. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zane surprised her with a gift. It was a brass nameplate, beautifully engraved, reading Kerrigan Farrington School of Dillon, Montana. Founded 1884. "I thought the school deserved a proper name," he said as she traced the letters with her finger, tears streaming down her face. "And you deserve recognition for what you have built." They mounted the nameplate above the schoolhouse door the next day, and the whole town turned out to celebrate. There were speeches and refreshments, and the mayor declared it Faith Farrington Day in Dillon. Emma, now 18 and working as a seamstress, stood up to thank Faith for teaching her to read and write, for opening up a world beyond the limited horizons of a dying mining town. Jack Morrison, who had finally passed the bar exam and was practicing law in Butte, sent a letter crediting Faith with changing his life. Standing there surrounded by her students, past and present, Faith finally understood the full impact of her decision to stay. It was not just about her principles or her stubbornness. It was about all these lives she had touched, all these futures she had helped shape. Every person who learned to read, every child who discovered a love of learning, every adult who gained confidence through education, they were her legacy. They were the reason it had all mattered. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Faith and Zane sat together on their porch swing, watching the stars come out. "You remember the first time we talked?" Faith asked. "You were leaning against the fence at the school and I was sweeping the porch. I remember. You were trying to sweep it down to bare wood. I thought you were the most determined person I had ever seen. I thought you were just some cowboy who would not understand why I stayed." Zane laughed. "Just some cowboy, I suppose I was back then. You have made me into something more." "No," Faith said firmly. "You were always more. I just needed time to see it." He pulled her closer and she rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and sage and home. "I am glad you stayed," he said softly. "I am glad I got up the courage to talk to you that day. I am glad I told you this town needed you to stay. I am glad I listened." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the gentle creaking of the swing and the distant call of a night bird the only sounds. Then Zane spoke again. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think you did not stay just for the town or the students or even for principal. I think part of you stayed because you knew, deep down, that something important was waiting for you here, that your real life was going to start in this place." Faith considered his words. "Maybe you are right. I was not looking for love when I came to Montana. I was looking for purpose. But I found both. And what a life it has been," Zane said. "What a beautiful life we have built." Faith looked out at their land, at the house they had built together, at the mountains standing eternal in the moonlight. Inside, their 3 children slept safely, and tomorrow she would go back to the school to teach new lessons to eager students. It was not the life she had imagined when she left Boston all those years ago. It was better. Yes, she agreed. What a beautiful life. The years continued to roll forward, bringing changes and challenges, joys and sorrows. The school grew until they needed to build a second room, and then a third. Faith trained 2 more assistant teachers, both former students, and established a lending library in the schoolhouse where anyone in town could borrow books. Matthew grew into a serious, studious boy who wanted to be a doctor. Catherine was wild and free-spirited, more interested in horses than books, though she could read and cipher as well as any of her classmates. Daniel, the youngest, inherited his mother's love of teaching and would often play school with his toys, lining up his wooden animals and teaching them their letters. Tommy graduated from university and returned to Dillon to practice law, opening the town's first law office. He married Emma, and they built a house near Faith and Zane's ranch. The symmetry of it pleased Faith, seeing 2 of her earliest connections to Dillon joined together in love. When Faith turned 35, the territorial governor visited Dillon again, this time specifically to honor the school's 20-year anniversary. The town was unrecognizable from the dying place it had been in 1884. The population had grown to nearly 300, with new businesses and homes, a proper town hall, and a second church. The school now served 50 students, and Faith's evening literacy program had graduated over 100 adults. "You have accomplished something remarkable here, Mrs. Farrington," the governor said during the ceremony. "You have proven that one determined person can make a profound difference. You stayed when others left, and in doing so, you gave this town a future." Faith accepted the accolades graciously, but in her heart, she knew the truth. She had not saved Dillon alone. The community had saved itself through hard work and determination and a refusal to give up. She had simply provided a spark, a reason to hope, and the people had done the rest. That evening, as she and Zane prepared for bed in the house they had shared for 18 years, Faith felt a deep sense of contentment. Her hair, still mostly auburn but threaded with gray now, hung loose down her back. Zane's face had lines that had not been there when they met, marks of years spent working in sun and wind. But when he smiled at her, she still felt that flutter in her stomach, that warmth in her chest. Time had not diminished what they had. If anything, it had deepened it, adding layers of shared experience and weathered storms to the foundation of love they had built. "What are you thinking about?" Zane asked, catching her watching him. "How lucky I am. How different my life could have been if I had given up and gone back to Boston." "The world's loss would have been immeasurable," he said, pulling her into his arms. "But mostly mine." She laughed and kissed him, this man who had seen her potential before she fully saw it herself. "I love you, Zane Farrington, more today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." "Now, who is being poetic?" he teased. "I learned from the best. You have always had a way with words, even if you claim to be just a simple cowboy. Just a simple cowboy who got impossibly lucky the day a stubborn teacher decided to stay in a dying town." Faith pulled back to look at him properly. "It was not luck, it was fate. You and I, this life, this town, it was all meant to be. I believe you are right." They settled into bed together, fitting into each other as easily as breathing, and Faith felt a profound gratitude for the path her life had taken. She had come to Montana seeking purpose and found it in abundance. But more than that, she had found love, family, community, and a place where she truly belonged. As she drifted off to sleep, Safe in Zane's arms, Faith thought about that younger version of herself, standing on the schoolhouse porch with a broom, watching wagons leave and wondering if she should follow. She wished she could go back and tell that frightened, determined young woman that everything would work out better than she could imagine. That staying would be the best decision she ever made. That the cowboy leaning against the fence would become the love of her life. That the dying town would bloom again, and she would be part of making it happen. But perhaps that younger Faith had known on some level. Perhaps that was why she had stayed, despite all logic suggesting she should go. Perhaps her heart had known what her mind could not yet accept. That home is not always where you start, but where you choose to plant roots and grow. And what roots they had grown, deep and strong, nourishing a family and a community that would flourish for generations to come. The teacher who stayed had become the woman who built a legacy, and the cowboy who saw her potential had become the partner who helped her achieve it. As dawn broke over the Montana mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Faith woke to another day of teaching and learning, loving and living. Matthew was already up, studying his medical texts at the kitchen table. Catherine was in the barn, probably sneaking sugar cubes to her favorite horse. Daniel would still be sleeping, exhausted from playing too hard the day before. Zane was making coffee, the familiar sounds and smells of morning filling their home with comfort and routine. When he saw her, he smiled, that same warm smile that had captured her heart 20 years ago, and poured her a cup. "Good morning, love. Ready for another day?" Faith accepted the coffee and stood on her toes to kiss his cheek. "Always ready." "We have a new student starting today, a girl whose family just moved here from Wyoming, and the evening class is working on writing letters to loved ones. It will be a good day." "Every day with you is a good day," Zane said simply, and he was right. Every day was a good day when you were living your purpose, surrounded by the people you loved, in the place you had chosen to call home. Faith had stayed when everyone left, had refused to give up on a dying town and struggling students. And in return, she had been given everything she never knew she needed. This was her life, her legacy, her love story. Not the story she had imagined when she boarded that train to Montana all those years ago, but something far better. Something real and hard-won, and absolutely worth every moment of struggle and doubt. Faith took another sip of coffee and looked out the window at the school in the distance, at the mountains beyond, at the endless Montana sky. Somewhere, perhaps other young teachers were facing similar decisions, wondering if they should stay or go, if their efforts mattered, if one person could make a difference. Faith hoped they would find the courage to stay. Hoped they would discover, as she had, that purpose and love were not mutually exclusive. Hoped they would find their own Zane, someone who would stand beside them and say, "This town needs you to stay." Because sometimes staying is the bravest thing you can do. And sometimes the most unlikely places become home, if only you give them the chance.